Hi, Wally, Terry, Lori, Ben, Elizabeth.
Hey, how are you?
Exhausted.
Rivka.
And you?
Hi, Lori.
Getting there.
Somebody's echoing.
All right, so let's try this. Hi, Amy. If you guys aren't talking, please put yourself on mute so that somebody's computer is echoing. You and hi to everybody. Did you get some rest, Rivka? Are you? No.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Brett.
Everybody, it's nice to put faces to names. How you doing, Rivka?
Okay. Once Adrian gets on, she'll be able to also, Brett, just for your information, she'll be able to mute people if there's a lot of feedback from one particular one. So, and you can see, Brett, you see where the share the screen button is when you want to go through your presentation?
Yes.
Give it a few more minutes for more people to show up before we start in. But this should take you about an hour. So the presentation by Brett should take about 30, 40 minutes, and then we'll have 20 minutes for questions from people.
Since this is a media call, I think I might as well brag. I sent an op-ed to the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I got rejected by both. Woohoo!
As somebody who has plenty of experience getting rejected from those outlets, it's a badge of honor. And don't feel too bad with the presidential debate coming up on Monday. That news has been dominating the editorial pages across the country.
But they're not saying much new.
That's for sure.
Hi, this is Sherry Boxer Baker in California, just saying hello.
Hi, Sherry.
Hi.
Good to have you on. This is Ben Suborger, and we have Brett Abrams is on from Unbendable Media, and we have Adrian, I believe, is on as well. He's going to be. Adrian, are you on there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. And so you're going to watch the feedback if we have issues with microphones or audio stuff, right?
Sure, yes.
Awesome. Okay, well, why don't we start and kick it off so we can use the time we have. Thank you everybody for joining. This is exciting to do this call. So this is a media training and kind of giving. Well, I'll let Brett do the introductions, but Brett Abrams is our PR consultant from Unbendable Media, and we're really pleased to have him on board. His team is going to be doing a lot of, and has been doing a lot of amazing work for us. But before we move into our day of action, we just want to kind of give this training to all. So if you have any questions, we can update you and kind of get everybody on the same page. So I know some people on this call have like a lot of experience and in public relations and in advocacy, and others of you, this might be your first time. So we just kind of want to go through this call and give you this brief training. We'll have a time for questions after. A note that this call is being recorded, just so if some people want to view it later, but we'll also be sending around materials to everyone, so you'll be able to review all the written materials that should update you with anything. Before I hand over to Brett, Adrian, is there anything else that I need to announce or mention?
I don't think so.
All right, that's great. Well, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Brett.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Brett Abrams, and I'm going to share my screen right now. All right. And then I'm going to pull this up. So can everybody see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Fantastic. All right. So my name is Brett Abrams. I am the founder of Unbendable Media. And this is a brief spokesperson training to go over a lot of different things all at once. So we're going to talk today about some basic tips for interviewing and responding to reporter questions. We're going to talk briefly about the importance of responding to different reporters at different types of media outlets differently. We're going to go over some key messages. We're going to review how you guys can reach out to local media in conjunction with our work, and some basic tips there. And then we're going to open it up to questions. So first things first, Unbendable Media is a progressive PR firm. We are employee owned, and the majority of our owners are women. So I am just the token boy here. And we work exclusively with organizations that are dedicated to a social justice mission, which is exactly what you guys are doing. And so we're really excited to be working with you guys and working to bring important attention to this issue, and hopefully get even more press than you guys were able to get last time you did this action and raised awareness and demanded justice. So this is who I am giving the presentation, and that is my dog, Keo. I love her more than anything in the world, and I take any opportunity to show her off. My contact information is also below in case there are any questions or concerns, but most of those should be routed through Ben and Jen and Adrian. All right, so we're going to go over some brief interviewing tips. But before we do, I just wanted to preface this by saying that this training is designed for people of all ages and all skill levels. So this is for somebody who it's their first activist experience, their first time working on the issue, and the first time talking to reporters, as well as somebody who's been doing this for 10 years. So some of this stuff might seem really basic, and other stuff might be new and novel, and hopefully we'll all learn something at the end of this training. We're going to have a space for questions at the end, so please hold your questions till the end. But if you want to make sure your question gets asked, type it in the chat window and we'll answer the questions in the order that they were chatted. All right. So the first tip for interviewing, and a lot of this sounds real basic, is come prepared. have three main talking points or three main messages that you want to get across. Now, while this is a really complex issue, a lot of the reporters, and I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this, are not necessarily complex people. And for them, they work sometimes to tell the shortest story possible to communicate to the general audience in a 1-minute segment. So by preparing three messages in advance, you are limiting the amount of material that they have to work with and making sure that your message has a greater chance of getting through. If you tell them 10 things and they only have the space for 2, they're going to pick the 2 that they like, and the 2 that they like might not be the most conducive to getting our message across. So generally, we like to boil things down to 3 main talking points, and we're going to go over some discussions and messaging points later in the training. So the second thing is research your audience. And what this means is that if you're doing a television interview, you should know that your audience is people watching the news at night, as opposed to if you're doing an interview with an online outlet, it's people that are reading the news during the day while they're at work or they're at home. And that comes into accord with researching the outlet that you're talking to. So it's important to know that if you get an interview request from WJLA, that's a TV station in Washington, D.C., that they're most likely going to want to talk to you on camera or talk to somebody in person outside of a venue. Whereas if you get a call from a radio station, they're most likely going to want to talk to you on the phone. Very basic things, but just wanted to go through this. Knowing your position in the debate, what that means is that you guys want to know what you're demanding and what is the thing that you want the audience to know. So in this case, our position is that the government needs to better fund research into ME, as well as clinical trials, and provide better education. And then identify potentially tough questions ahead of time. I'm sure you've all dealt with a level of skepticism in which reporters don't seem to understand your issue and ask potentially toxic questions. And think about what are those tough questions ahead of time so that if you're asked them, that you feel the most comfortable responding. And we've got a few tips for you guys later on in the training as to how to handle tough questions. The second is to concisely deliver your message. So always start with the most important thing, and that is, why are these million missing events happening across the country, and what are they demanding? You can talk about your personal story. You could talk about all of the things that are important to you. You could talk about the lack of funding. You could talk about the amount of people compared to other diseases. But by leading with your message, you make sure reporters pick it up the easiest. It's the easiest way to make sure your message comes across. So in this case, start with why we're protesting and what the demands of the protest are. Provide as much background information as you want, but only when necessary. One of the things we discussed before was that reporters, if given too much information, will pick and choose what they want and might not concisely deliver the story in a way that is the most impactful. So provide background information, but make sure to centralize it in your message as demanding justice for people with ME and demanding increased government funding for research, clinical trials, and education. If you ever get asked a tough question, don't repeat the question or the claim. So if someone says, aren't people with ME faking it? Don't say, I don't think people with ME are faking it. Answer the question by saying something much more clinical, like ME is a neuroimmune disease that has been on the World Health Organization docket since 1969, or another one of those points, but never repeat the charge or question. After you make your point, stop talking. Sometimes when we are like talking to a reporter or talking on camera, we get really excited and we keep going. And when reporters get silent, we try and fill that silence. But in this case, we just want to make sure that reporters get as much of the information as possible, but understand the most important parts of it. So after you make your key point, don't hesitate to stop talking. The less you give reporters, the less they have to work with, which means that the stuff that you give them, if it's on message, will almost always break through. And don't ever lie. If a reporter asks you a question that you don't know the answer to, like how many people with ME live in your city, or what are other sort of things at the FDA, and you don't know the answer to that question, don't lie, don't make it up. You can just tell the reporter that you don't have that information right now and that you'll get back to them as soon as you get an answer. Be honest, because if you lie, you're likely to get caught, and it undermines you as a source and undermines your credibility with the reporter in the future. The next important thing to do is to contextualize the conversation. And in this case, you guys are especially suited to. Tell stories, give the issue of ME a personal face. If someone in your family is affected by it, if you're impacted by it day to day, tell your story. And also use some basic statistics. So express the magnitude and scope of the problem. There are nearly 2.5 million Americans who have been diagnosed with ME or are not diagnosed with ME but are living with ME in the United States. But only use your facts when they back up a larger point. So talking about the scope of ME and the impact it has on the country is important only when you talk about the fact that what we need is that increased government research and funding to make sure that there's a pathway to treatment and a clear plan for diagnosis. And the last thing to do is control the interview. And this means that if you are asked tough questions, you should use key phrases and key tactics in order to make sure that you pivot back to your message. So when you're talking about what the most important thing is, say the most important thing is. And the second that they hear the most important thing, it triggers people's brains to say, oh, well, I better write this down. And if you say, there are 2 reasons why the government needs to increase funding, it triggers the reporter to write down the number 1 and 2, which means that the more information we can give them and make sure they write down and pick up on, the better the stories are going to be, and the more attention and the better attention we're going to bring to the cause. The next tactic is called bridging, where you use specific phrases to move away from a question you don't like to give an answer that you do like. So if somebody asks, well, isn't the FDA or isn't the National Institute of Health already funding important diseases? You could say, that's an interesting question, but the most important thing is that there's 2.5 million people with ME in the United States without a clear plan for diagnosis and treatment. And we desperately need research and funding to make sure this disease goes away and that the people who are suffering with it can live their lives and stop missing out on their lives. So by bridging and using these tactics to take a tough question, you can make sure that your message breaks through no matter what. And a lot of these things sound political. So sometimes, when we watch TV or Fox News or CNN, and you hear the people asked a question and they don't answer the question, they give an answer that they want to give. And it's sometimes frustrating and really annoying. And I'm sure if you're all watching the election, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But what they're doing is they're making sure that their message gets through more than answering the reporter's questions. So sometimes using these tactics help reinforce the message and make sure that it's the story that makes the headline. So when talking to reporters, there are different approaches for different outlets, and that's like newspapers, radio, television. And we're going to go over a few tips for all of those different outlets. So print and online outlets will most likely talk to you either before the event or at the event. And when talking to them, remember to talk slowly and assume that everything you say is being written down and recorded. So don't talk about how you don't like somebody else you're organizing with. Don't say the mean comment about the person who told you guys you couldn't do a rally here. Make sure that everything you say, you know that the reporter could potentially be writing it down. Be a resource for reporters. If reporters ask you a question about where a statistic came from, give them that statistic. Help them find the outlet. Offer to email it to them when you get off the phone call. By sharing your knowledge with reporters, you make yourself a trustworthy source, and you make it so that they want to give you the best coverage possible. Also, be personable and personal. Talk about your story and ask them about their lives. A lot of times we think of the news as this sort of creation that comes at us, but the people behind it generally are really compassionate and really good people who care about the public interest. By telling your story and by building a relationship with them, you make sure that future coverage and future actions is even more favorable for you guys and will help build power in your local cities that will help build power around the country. And remember, when you're talking to a reporter who's from a print or online outlet, they're likely to give you a phone call. So you should feel free to have your notes in front of you to remind you of key facts and figures. This isn't TV. You can hold a piece of paper right in front of your face and no one will know what's happening. So the next type of outlet are radio outlets. And radio outlets typically like to do coverage previewing the action beforehand. So you'll hear sometimes on the radio that a bunch of people are gathering to do this, or a bunch of people are gathering to do that. And they likely preview it with a 1 or 2 minute segment. So if you get radio interview requests, there are some key tactics here. So the first is that you should remember that you should stress your key points by raising your intensity level and your pitch, not your voice. Everyone can tell when somebody is yelling into the phone on the radio, and you don't have to talk loud in order for you to be able to be heard. The second is that because it's a radio interview, you should make sure that you keep your notes in front of you to remind you of key points, messages, facts, and figures. Radio is a really good outlet where people who listen to radio tend to imagine pictures in their head. So this is your opportunity to use words that create an image or paint a picture of your issue. So if somebody in your family or one of your friends is affected with ME, talk about their experiences being bedridden. Talk about sort of what their life looks like. Talk about the fact that you guys are going to be displaying shoes or holding a banner or rallying with balloons. Use your words to paint a picture for the audience and help tell them their story and engage them. And while this is not we are not setting you guys up on any sort of talk shows where you're going to be going back and forth with an expert. Sometimes the morning radio shows have crazy callers call in, or they have crazy hosts that ask a little bit of weird questions. Don't ever engage with them. Just remember, it's your job to get the message across about why these actions are happening and what we're demanding at them, and shift back to those messages whenever you feel as though someone's asking you a question that's distracting you. The next sort of media outlet that we'll get, and I think will most likely be what we get at the actual actions on Tuesday, is television. Local TV absolutely loves telling personal stories and citing protests and being able to pick up coverage and relay that message to the viewer at home. So remember, when you do television, you should smile, sit up straight, stand up straight, and assume that the viewer can see you at all times, even if you aren't talking. That means don't pick your nose, don't fix your hair, and that when you're talking and sitting up straight, make sure that you look into the camera so that eye contact is built with the people who are at home. When you do speak in short, quotable sound bites that are about 20 to 30 seconds long. So local television will probably interview you for 5 to 10 minutes, but that 5 to 10 minutes will be reduced down to a segment of probably no more than 30 seconds of you talking, which means you want to make sure that what you say can be cut down to 20 or 30 seconds so that they don't cut you off and that they get their entire message in an entire sentence. That said, you should always speak slowly and clearly. And avoid excessive or distracting hand gestures or pause words like, like, Sometimes when you're on TV, we have a tendency to talk with our hands, and I do. I'm super guilty of it. But remember that if the camera is focused towards you, make sure your hands don't go in front of your face so that people don't see you and your hands, and they actually see you and your face. Another thing to remember when doing television interviews is that TV reporters are generally on your side. So they might tell you that they want you to move over a little bit, or they want to film you outside of a certain location, or they might ask everybody to get together really tight so that it looks like a bigger event. And when you're working with the cameramen or camera women, their job is to get the best shot possible. And it's good to work with them. And if you make a mistake, you should feel free to say to the reporter, hey, I made a mistake. Is it okay if I do that again? The last type of interview request, and the least likely one that we're going to get, is something I'm sure you're all a little bit well versed with, which is video chat and Skype. One of the things there is just to make sure that the lighting is natural, that the camera is at eye level, and that you're in a quiet place. I can't tell you how many people we've worked with who have had their dogs barking in the background and dirty laundry on their bed. Make sure you have a strong internet connection. Wear solid and bold colors, so too many patterns can be distracting, especially on video chat. Wear makeup. This goes for both boys and girls. Sometimes video chat and camera sources can really make things look dull. And by wearing makeup or by doing your hair or making sure that you're looking your best, you'll make sure that it looks the best on camera and on television. And make sure to set up behind a plain background. So if you're doing a video chat, put up a sign that says Emmy Action or Millions Missing. But make sure that there's not too many other distracting things on the wall so that the viewer's focus is always on you. Cool. So we've put together some messages that we want to get across at the events on Tuesday and to reporters ahead of time. All of these messages, including all of these notes on interviewing tips, will be sent to you guys after the call. And these messages are only guidelines. We're not trying to put words in your mouth. These are the kinds of things that are meant to help a beginner tell the story of the event. But they can be very helpful, and hopefully they will be helpful to you guys. So we're just going to run through them really quickly, but know that you'll be getting a copy of these, which have both simplified and expanded messages, and then you should always feel free to put the messages in your own words and talk about the things that are the most important to you. So the key messages that we have are 4 main points. And I've reduced it to 4 main points because there's a lot of information, and making sure that we have specific talking points and specific message points that accomplish different things helps ensure that we're able to deliver the most important parts of our message. So the first talking point is about Emmy itself, because for a lot of people, whether it's reporters or viewers at home or readers at home, this could be the first time that they're hearing about Emmy. So the first talking point is just a set of facts about Emmy. So Emmy is a devastating disease that disables nearly 2.5 million Americans and 20 million people worldwide. This disease, which impacts people of all ages, races, and ethnicities, leaves more than 75% of the people with it unable to work, and nearly 25% of patients homebound. The next talking point sets up the call to action. So talks about the problem. Despite the fact that Emmy is not a rare disease, public health authorities in the US and around the world have ignored the impact of the disease for more than 30 years, resulting in doctors and medical students without knowledge about how to diagnose the disease and promoting outdated treatments like talk therapy and exercise. There are still no FDA-approved treatments, and this leaves millions of people both undiagnosed and without a clear pathway to recovery. So by setting up the problem, we then go into the next sort of talking point, which talks about the demands and the ask. So that's why thousands of people are taking part in the Millions Missing protests around the world on September 27th, demanding that our public health officials adequately fund research and clinical trials into ME in a manner that is equitable to other major disabling diseases, and to ensure that there is accurate medical education into clinical care and diagnosis for people suffering with ME. And the last point talks about the protests themselves and contextualizes the protests. So the protests are called Millions Missing to draw attention to the millions of people living with ME who are so sick that they're missing out on their jobs, school, social life, and their families. Many people with ME are too sick to even attend the protests or advocate in their own lives. So the talking points are arranged in a way that sort of explains what the problem is, or sort of what the issue is, what the specific problem with the issue is, what our solution is, and why these events are sort of being talked about the way they are. And using this sort of same flow of messages helps make sure that the reporter records the full narrative and tells the best story possible. So the next thing are a set of key facts that were provided. And we've reduced it down to a small set of facts so that you guys don't have to memorize too much stuff. But these facts are available for you guys to either print out, and we'll send you sort of a handout, just to know, so that when talking to reporters, you can help make sure that their stories are the best stories possible. So the facts are, ME is a debilitating systematic neuroimmune disease categorized by post-exertional relapse Causes dysregulation of the immune system, nervous system, and energy metabolism systems. ME was recognized as a neurological disorder by the World Health Organization in 1969. Patients with ME score more poorly on quality life standards than patients with multiple sclerosis, stroke, diabetes, renal failure, lung disease, heart failure, and various cancers. That's a good statistic that really helps contextualize the problem for reporters. 1.1 to 2.5 million Americans have ME, yet as the National Academy of Medicine noted, there has been remarkably little research funding to discover its causes or possible treatments. So that cites a really important source that really helps verify the claims that we're making. And then in government funding, ME receives about the same money for research as hay fever, which does not leave patients bedridden for decades. ME ranks far below other similar debilitating illnesses. ME/CFF gets about $2 per patient per year in NIH funding, roughly $6 million last year, whereas a disease like multiple sclerosis gets $235 per patient, and a disease like HIV/AIDS gets about $2,500 per patient. Now, it's important to remember that when talking about these diseases, we're not insulting people. We're saying that people with HIV/AIDS or multiple sclerosis don't suffer or don't deserve cures. What we're saying is that the funding for ME/CFS is dramatically below the level where it should be, given the seriousness of the disease. Okay, so making friends with reporters. This is the next section, and we know that a lot of you have expressed a lot of excitement to reaching out to reporters. So one of the things that we've done is we've provided lists of reporters and local news desks for you guys to reach out to and make contacts and build relationships in your own media markets. So we're going to go through a set of tips and some strategy recommendations for pitching the local health and science reporters in your area, who are the people who are going to write the most complicated stories about ME and the millions missing protests, as well as talk about reporters who are at local news desks, who are most likely not going to talk and know a lot about the issue, but are going to come and film you guys and try and get the best shots possible. So first things first, for local health reporters, remember that these reporters are interested in telling a local news story and taking a national issue and bringing it to the local audience at home. So you should be sure to look up the reporter that you're talking to before talking to them. Check out to see if they have a Twitter. Google their name. Check out their news outlet and see other stories they've written. By understanding their tone and by understanding what they focus on, you'll better be in a position to pitch them. Some reporters like to talk to experts only and don't include any personal information. Other reporters write their stories entirely based off of information from local stories and sharing local people's situations. Some reporters make important phone calls to the organizations that we're targeting. So a reporter in your hometown might give a call up to the National Institute of Health and ask them why funding for ME is so low. And that's great because that will bring the issue right to their doorstep. So if you have a reporter that you know has asked questions of various outlets or has reached out to things based off their previous reporting, you should be sure to emphasize those facts. Okay, so one of the things that we recommend is sending an email note, and we've provided emails for all of the reporters to the local health reporter or editor prior to the Millions Missing event, so sometime Wednesday afternoon or Thursday morning, about who you are, including details for the action, as well as what the demands are, and speakers of the demonstration. Use this opportunity to share your personal story and tell them all about the event. Talk about how we're going to march from one place to another, or lay out shoes, or carry a banner, or ask this person to do this. Later in the day, if possible, after sending the email, call the reporter or editor just to make sure they've gotten your email. Reporters get so many emails a day, press releases, they get pitches for products. So what you should do is make sure that they've received your email, and that's a really nice way to ask them a question without being too intrusive. So ask if they've received your email. If not, ask them what their email is or the best way to send it to them so that they can resend it. And if they have received their email, ask them if they have any questions or would be interested in more details. This is also an opportunity to ask that if there was something, ask that if this is something that they would be interested in covering or whether or not they're not the right reporter. Sometimes a reporter can change beats really quickly and might say, no, this is not the issue for me, but reach out to my colleague at this phone number because he would really love to hear from you guys. So if a reporter says that this is not something they're interested in, you can use that as a follow-up to say, well, is somebody at this outlet interested in covering? Would you help me find the right person? But that said, we did most of the research, so it should be the right person that you're calling each time. But also note that reporters and editors are very busy and oftentimes struggling with competing deadlines. So if there's breaking health news in your area, that might mean that the reporter is not able to pay attention to this issue until much closer to the action, or maybe not at all. So always be respectful of the journalist and understand that they may not have the time to cover the event or hear about the story at the first time that you reach out, and that's okay. Don't get discouraged. Record that information, and what we'll do is we'll find somebody else who will. The next sort of set of tips are just sort of about your personal interactions with reporters. So when you explain to the reporter help explain to the reporter why the action is significant, but always remember that reporters are juggling competing things, and we don't want to bully the reporter or seem overly aggressive. That will turn off coverage and could make it so that the reporter makes sure that nobody from his outlet attends the event, even if it's a different set of reporters that cover local news or photography. Do not call or email the reporter more than once every 48 hours after you've got in touch with them, unless otherwise instructed by the journalist. If the reporter says, thanks so much, I'll look into this and get back to you, don't harass them because that will make the reporter less likely to want to dig into this issue. Oftentimes, reporters also have to contact their editor through a process where there's a meeting once a day. So a reporter might tell you at 10 a.m. on Monday that they're not sure if they're going to cover, but that's because they're waiting to hear back from their editor at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. If a reporter does seem interested, offer to provide him or her with all of the additional details and connect the journalist with other members of your community and other experts in your area, including national spokespeople for Emmy Action. That way, the story that they write is the best story possible and quotes as many people from our side as possible. And record your progress and share it with us as a team. If you talk to a reporter who seems really interested, who is interested in one specific angle, that feedback can be really helpful for us in making sure that we use that same strategy with other reporters in other places. We've also provided you with information for the news desks. The news desks are where breaking and local events get covered. So those are the places that are your TV stations and your local news reporters at your various newspapers and outlets. Those news desks will write down your information, record it in a calendar, and they will discuss it at their planning meeting, most likely on Tuesday morning. So these news desks might say, this is something we're interested in covering, but we can't confirm with you until this point in time. Also note that news desks tend to operate on news of the day and are very much influenced by what's happening in your area. A big storm, a local shooting, even a cute dog video in your area could distract, or sporting event, could distract those reporters and make it harder for them to figure out what they're going to cover. So just understand the fact that these reporters at news desks cover different things every day, and that they might not be able to give you an answer to whether or not they'll cover your Millions Missing event until just before the event. So email a note to the news desk at least 12 hours, but no more than 48 hours before your action. In this case, because our actions are occurring over on Tuesday before a weekend, you should feel free to start your outreach on Friday and count that as 48 business hours. Email a note to the news desk at least 12 hours, but no more than 48 hours before that's supposed to say make a phone call. You should follow up with the news desk with the phone number that we provided and make sure that they've received your information. you can ask them whether or not this information is on the calendar, and that's usually a trigger to make sure that they'll write down their information. If they check the calendar and tell you that it is, great, you've done a great job. And we're going to be making all of these phone calls in concert with your efforts. So when calling the news desks and emailing them, be sure to share your name and contact information, information about the goal, action, or protest, information about the who, what, when, where, and why, so that they have all the details needed to cover. And add any local speakers or influential people in your area to that email or phone call so that they know, like, oh, wow, we're going to have a state senator there. We should send a political reporter down to cover it. Or when they pitch that in their planning meeting, they pitch that to their editor and it makes it more newsy. And then on Tuesday or Monday night or Tuesday morning, and we'll be doing this as well, so if you can't do this, don't worry. Send a note or a follow-up call to the news desk at least 2 hours before your action, asking them if they're going to come. Usually most newsrooms make their decision on coverage by 10 and 11 a.m., which means that if you call them around 11 a.m., they should be able to say whether or not they're going to be attending. Now, remember, in this, starting with this pitch, you're going to have the opportunity to talk to hopefully a lot of reporters. Remember that reporters are people. They have people in their lives too, and they might even know people who are impacted by ME. So be personable and be nice. Make sure to check out their Twitter accounts and their past reporting. Always be honest, always be a resource, and never be shy to tell your story and own the fact that this is an issue that you are an expert on. That's everything. Thanks so much. Now, I'm going to open it up to, let me just grab the thing right here. Stop sharing. So I'm going to open this up to questions, and I know that there have probably been a few different sort of questions in the document. But let's just start this way. Is there anybody with any questions? Hand raised? Okay.
Harry, do you have a question? No. Okay.
I
All
have one question.
Yes.
Okay, so during the key points, we use a figure of 2.5 million people affected in the U.S., and then further down in the details, we're using the figure that was given to us by the CDC, which is a range from 1 million to 2.5 million. So is it important to be consistent in that, or is there a reason why we're using the upper end of that in the talking points, for the key talking points?
That's a good question. So one, that could have been a little bit of the inconsistency is mostly due to a copying error on my part where I pulled from different sets of information. But the reason that we went with the 2.5 million number is that for reporters, big numbers and big things are newsy. So you guys should feel comfortable using whichever numbers you feel most comfortable with. But for a reporter hearing 2.5 million, it makes them think the issue is even bigger, which makes it more likely that they'll give it favorable coverage and give it the sense of urgency that we need. But if you don't feel comfortable using the 2.5 number and want to use the one between 2.5 number, you should feel comfortable using that number as well.
And just to jump in, Brett, Lolly, so what we did with what we're doing with the press releases now is in the header to the press release, it says, I think the final language is as many as 2.5 million suffer from ME. But then in the text of the thing, we give the range, and we also give the citations. So we kind of grab their attention, but we also try to be appropriate and yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Any other questions?
I guess just to,
I could say, oh, go ahead, Ben. I'm sorry, not Ben, Mark.
just one comment is if they ask on why don't you know how many people It's basically because the CDC doesn't even track this disease. There's required reportable diseases, and this is not on the list. So the CDC, to some degree, is not doing an adequate job of even tracking this disease. That's if you get a question.
That's a good point. Thanks, Mark. Any other questions?
This is Bobby in San Francisco. Oh, Rivka, you go.
No, Poppy, you go.
Okay, I just want to make sure. So I joined late. So there are several of us doing media in San Francisco. Should we divide up who's calling who, or should we all call the same 3 people?
That's a great question. You should divide up who's doing who, so that, and then make sure that you're in communication with each other. That way, reporters don't get a bunch of phone calls from different people with the same pitch. That doesn't make it seem more urgent for reporters. Sometimes it can just annoy reporters and make them like just angry, and even if they're going to cover, make the coverage less favorable. So you should definitely divide up who you're going to be calling, and making sure that one person runs point on calling all of them, or one person runs point on calling each person.
Okay, and also you're going to post these pictures in an email for us?
Yes, you will be getting 2 documents from us. One that has a short talking point set, one that has a larger talking points. One that's a short talking point set, a larger talking point set, some key facts, and then all of the interviewing tips. And a second document which helps you with pitches and has a few sample pitches and sample language for you guys to use in your emails and phone calls.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Rivka, I think you're up.
Hi, this is Rivka. I have a couple of thoughts. One is, I think we're all probably going to be trying to scramble around over the next couple of days and start calling, reporters. So have the local city press releases gone out?
No, the local city press releases are going out first thing tomorrow morning in each time zone. So that's a great question. We are planning to send them out in each time zone at roughly 10 a.m. Local time. So you should feel free to start making pitch calls just to make sure we have maximum window at noon local time.
And Adrian
Okay.
Adrian will circulate to you all your final local press releases, but they're set. Unbendable will go out with that with the first release and contact, and then you guys can all follow up.
So I do think that, especially with the local health reporters, that we should certainly call them ASAP. I'm just thinking like both the Washington Post and I think the Boston Globe have like weekly health sections, so they might fill up. They might already even be scheduled now packed with their stories, so they might not have room for more stories, but just in case they do, it's great to probably contact them sooner rather than later. And the other thought I had was just in terms of numbers, like as Ben knows, I was, trying to stress that we should not stress the numbers, how many will be present at the protests or the rallies, because it's because we probably won't have a lot of people at these demonstrations, and I think that that's why we're called Millions Missing. And if people in the local cities can emphasize, if a reporter comes and they see 5 people, we need to explain, be really clear that that's part of the whole situation, why we're calling this Millions Missing. There are 5 people here because each of the 5 people is representing 1,000 people from our state who can't attend because they're they're missing. They're missing out of their they're missing from their own lives. I'm sorry, it's the end of the day, and so I'm not speaking too clearly. But I just wanted to say something about de-emphasizing the number of protesters that will be present, because that's not going to be our sexy point. Our sexy point is actually millions missing, the people who are missing from the protest. They're missing from their jobs, and they're missing from schools, and they're also missing from the protest.
Thanks, Rivika. Brett, you want to address that of how you, if a reporter like asks, when you're talking on the phone with a reporter and they're asking about the event, what maybe to say or not to say, how to address that, and if they ask you point blank about the number of people going to be there?
Well, right now, so yes, great question. So right now, in the RSVP's sort of marking, it does seem as though each event is going to be getting relatively good turnout compared to other sort of protests around issues that are similar to this, right? Like, this isn't, a massive environmental march or, gay rights march. This is a local sort of community protest to build attention. And so what I would say is that right now the numbers are high enough, at least by RSVPs, for you guys to comfortably say the numbers, right? Like, I wouldn't necessarily give them a specific, like, we're going to have 12 people, but you could say we're expecting between, 25 to 50, or depending upon your city, between 50 to 100 based off of the RSVPs. So you should answer with "we're expecting." That way you give the reporter a range, but aren't committing to a hard number. And if turnout is lower and reporters are there asking, one of the things that I would stress that you guys do is make sure that the people that you are protesting with get as close together as possible. And then the camera person will actually come closer to you to look like there are more people at the events and make the action look bigger. And you should value the fact that, while there's a small contingent of people out here today to bring attention to this issue and demand justice for people with ME, that we're here in the place of the millions missing who can't be here because they're sick. And 25% of the people with ME are bedridden or homebound. So you should feel free to stress the fact that you guys are standing in place, representing people, and usually using the representation language is a great way to lean back to the fact that ME is a debilitating disease that leaves too many people unable to take part in their own lives or even advocate for their own well-being.
This is Adrian. Sorry, I just turned my video off. But I think in a lot of the press releases, they have been edited to take out the specific number, so that's not being emphasized in all of the press releases at this point. I think for some of the press releases where there are quite a few people, they are including that number. But for others where they're not really sure how many people are going to come, or it's not that many, I think they've just taken out the number to make it to not focus on that.
Hi, I'm Jane Tatum. I'll be at the San Francisco protest or Day of Action. And I was wondering, how do we know for sure which news agencies have received the press release? Because for one, I'll probably be contacting my local news agencies, which is in the Central Valley of California, and other co-organizers will be contacting within San Francisco. But how do we know who's gotten a press release and who has not?
Sorry, I was on mute. So good question. We will be sending the press release to every TV outlet, newspaper, and radio station in your areas. So I think it would be safe for you guys to assume that everyone should get it. Now, reporters are very often the kind of people who will have it in their email and just not look back, 100 emails to see that they have it. And if that's the case and somebody you talk to says they don't have it, you should feel free to send that to them again. But every single person and outlet that we provided in terms of local contacts will be getting the press materials. And what we will be doing on Wednesday is calling each one of those areas to confirm that they have received it.
Awesome. Awesome. Very good.
I'd like to. Can I say one other thing? I know that we have the thumbs up to write our own personal essays and op-eds and pitch them, and 2 people in our community did do that. Amy in Chicago and Jess in Georgia, and they're excellent. These personal stories are really, really powerful, and they should be pitched. So each city should help, whoever is in Chicago should help Amy to pitch, and whoever is in Georgia should help Jess to pitch their personal essays because they're very compelling. But I want to encourage other people in other cities to also write their personal essays and to do it soon because today's Tuesday. These, I'm sure, can also be attractive to media, to press after the protest, because you can also put it in retrospective. We had this protest, but it's just a resource that you have available to you, your own story.
This is Adrian again. So, like Brett had mentioned, tomorrow I'm going to be sending out the press contacts that Unbendable is reaching out to. I'm sending those out tomorrow. And Brett, I just wanted to confirm, so in that email that I send to each city, should I also include a copy? Actually, I guess they have the updated version of their, I should also include the updated version of their press release, right? Because I think you're probably locking those now so that no more edits will come in. But should I include that on the email as well in case they want to send that out again?
You're on mute, Brett.
Sorry. One of the things that we do is we actually attach cookies to our emails so that we can see when reporters have opened them. So there are plenty of times where reporters who we know are actually looking at the email while we talk to them have said that they don't know where the email is or they've not gotten the press release. So one of the things that you guys should just know is that you might call a reporter up at the news desk and say, hey, I want to make sure this event is on your calendar, and then call back the next day just to make sure it's there, and the reporter will tell you, I have no idea what you're talking about. And don't hesitate and don't feel discouraged. Reporters are incredibly unorganized sometimes, and just be happy and send them another version of it and follow up to make sure they've gotten it. So we'll be doing that as well in concert with your pitching efforts. So if there is also one of those things where you don't, you aren't able to call through the local news desk that day, or you aren't able to make phone calls before your event, or even if you don't get to reach out to the local health reporter, do not worry. There's a team here, and we've got 3 people who are going to be pitching this all this week and all next week. So just in case you guys are unable to do it, we've got your back and we'll be providing support in that capacity.
I might mention this disease maps thing has a list. You can map a particular area. Some cases there's not many people, but in the cases there are, you can display that and bring that on a piece of paper to show people also.
Great. Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Brett, everybody who's joined this call. It's 6:50. Well, it's 2 minutes till. So any final things before we close? And if not, Adrian, if you have questions, probably the best person to reach out to is Adrian. Who will get you the information you need if you're missing something. We can put you in contact. So, but thank you all for joining the call.
Thank you. It was helpful. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was helpful. Thank you.
Bye, Lori.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye,
I'm
Lolly.
eager to see if anybody
Thanks,
answers
Brett.
these
Yes.
messages, these news things. Okay, good luck to us.
Bye.
Lori,
Bye.
send me your story, Lori.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, Adrian, are you still there? Adrian's gone. Is that Elizabeth from Georgia? No.
Hello. Oh, hi. Is that Rivka? This is Arpita.